public transportation.
Wow, pretty good.
Wow, that was kind of a startling conversation starter there, huh, Rob?
Yeah, when you see those clips strung together like that, it's really intense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I don't know about you, but it's almost like it forces you to want to get angry and pick a side immediately.
Yeah. Yep. Picking sides is hard to do, or not hard to do, I guess. When you start seeing these news clips and these news feeds and stuff, it sort of amps you up a little bit.
I think it's designed to stir us up to get angry, to get offended.
I agree.
It's almost like everything you're seeing on news today wants us to think we have a right to be offended.
Yeah. In Bible tells us to be careful for the root of bitterness, which leads to offense.
Yeah.
And it looks like in our country that is where we are by and large.
Yeah.
Particularly when you turn the TV on or you turn your phone on and you're surfing the internet. It's like we're living in an inflammatory time.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's just crazy. With the technology that we have, if you're plugged in, it's hard to escape it.
Yes.
You can't escape it unless you're just completely unplugged. And so that makes it hard for us to now not deal with it mentally because it's right in our face all the time.
Yeah.
And it's inflammatory.
If you don't know, Rob's pastor at Kindhouse. I'm pastor at the River. And for us, coming from different backgrounds, both your parents were educators, right?
That's right.
And my dad worked at a factory, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
We grew up in Memphis, which is a pretty racially divided city.
Yeah.
You grew up in Murfreesboro. Was that an issue there?
No, not like it would have been in Memphis.
Yeah.
And we know with Memphis's history and the civil rights movement. No, that wasn't my experience. And then I went to school in Murfreesboro, but I lived out in the country too. So that was a different experience. Being black, living out in the country was different because outside of our neighborhood, it was all white. It was all country folk. So that's unique experience, to say the least.
And what's interesting is when I wanted to play ball at the local basketball area, I was pretty much in Memphis. I was about the only white kid.
Yeah, I bet you were.
I was, and I wasn't any good. So it was bad.
So the Lord called him to preach.
Yeah, that's right. They did not call me to the NBA. Yeah. So what's interesting is we've got such varying cultures,
right?
As we're coming from this, and yet we both got the gospel in the middle.
Yeah.
And how do you see the gospel as you're talking to students, because you work with minority students at Tech,
right?
Yeah, and as you work with students and hear their concerns, what advice do you give them?
My best advice is to think about the other side. And that's not just the students of color, that's the white students as well. Regardless of who the student is, my mindset is to think about somebody that's not like you. Think about somebody that's on the other side and their perspective. And I think that's really Jesus's message in a lot of ways. When he talks about, when he's walking through the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, it's all selfless stuff.
Yeah.
It's all outside of yourself. And so that's kind of my perspective when I'm doing diversity and inclusion talks with our students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in Proverbs talks about how one man seems right until you hear the other man's side.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part when we isolate ourselves and we just hear our side. Boy, we can be so right. We can be so self-righteous. Yeah. It's like, I can't believe it. When I first saw the part about the NFL, my son's in the military, and my first reaction was to be angry. Yeah. It was like, I can't believe that somebody's going to disrespect the flag in that way. And that was my first response. And fortunately, the good Lord held my tongue, and I didn't get on Facebook right away. And I tried to do like you said. I was like, I want to go out and find the people that disagree with me. I want to go out and find the Facebook posts that are not fueling my opinion, but so that I can hear the other opinion. Because I think that's wisdom. I think that's what Christ calls us to. Everyone wants to push us to the extremes. Either you're an extreme over here, like we're all being offended and it's all about our rights, or we're extremed over here like, I don't want to hear you whine anymore, shut up, get over it. How can we meet in the middle? And because it's not just this issue, it's not just I know the NFL is saying that we're protesting, racial. I'm not sure how they state it.
Racial inequality. I guess
inequality and the problems with corrupt police officers
Sure.
bringing unjust attention to minorities.
Yeah.
And yet that's just one of millions of issues we have.
Sure.
And how do we walk through that as believers and not just turn a blind eye?
We have to care enough, first of all, to have conversation with people who may not share the same perspective as ours. And then at the same time, we also have to be bold enough and be willing enough to have those conversations. So I think it's a desire to be concerned about what's going on, but then also the boldness to be able to have a conversation. And that's a difficult thing.
Well, wouldn't you even say seek it out?
Yeah.
Because, if I can want the conversation, but if I don't call you up.
I keep it real. So I think one of the things in my studies of race in culture is when you're in the majority, generally the majority has the power in a situation.
Yes.
And when you're in the majority, it then is incumbent upon you to seek out the change because you have sort of, you've got I don't want to say the authority, but you sort of control the power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I would say for white people, definitely is a conversation to seek out with folks of color in your circle that you trust and you can have an open and honest conversation with and know you won't leave the conversation and relationship is lost.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important because we've had a lot of conversations.
We have. And it's our conversations about race and stuff like that have been good for me.
And me too. And me too. And I think it's important that you don't go in the conversation with the goal to win. See, I think that's big.
It's huge.
You got to go in with the goal to learn.
Yeah.
Because I know when we talked, after the election,
Yes. Yes.
and we were coming from totally different perspectives.
That's right.
And yet I feel like I really understood more what was going on culturally in our country than ever before after talking to you.
Yeah, I agree. And my perspective changed as well, I would say. One of the things that we can look to when we have difficult conversations, if we go into it being open and being led by the Holy Spirit, is your relationship actually should be strengthened when you come out of these difficult conversations. Relationships shouldn't be lost if you're going into it led of the Holy Spirit. I really believe that because our friendship, at least from my perspective, is better than what it was before we started having those difficult conversations right immediately following the election.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And a big part of that, though, I would say, is because we both have a mutual goal. I mean, my goal truly is I want to see more people come to Christ. I know that's your goal.
Yes, sir.
Our goal is that we seek unity. I know that's your goal.
Yes.
We may go at it different ways. And I think that's okay.
It is okay.
I mean, because culturally, we're still different.
That's right.
You wear ties. I don't. You got your doctorate. I don't. You're good looking. I'm better looking.
Well, there it is. There it is, folks. Firsthand, you heard it. This idea that we sort of fell into immediately after the election, and even now, in some ways, when it comes to our president, and so if you support the president, then you can be completely written off. If you don't support him, on the other side, you can be completely written off just because of that particular stance. And if there's no conversation, if there's no, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. Why do you support, or why did you support President Trump? Why did you vote for him? Why do you not support President Trump? Why did you not vote for him? Instead of, okay, you voted for President Trump, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're this X, Y, Z. If you didn't vote for him, then you're racist on the other
Yeah,
side.
If you knelt at the national anthem, you hate
there
veterans.
you
hate veterans.
Let's throw that in there.
Yeah, you hate veterans.
Yeah, and
But
you hate our country.
And you hate our country. And if you stood against the will of your coach, well then you're crummy too, because you didn't seek unity. And
Yeah.
I mean, hearing it both sides.
Yeah.
And why do we feel the need? Why do we feel the need to push to the extremes instead of move to the middle?
I think, and not to get off the subject really, but I think part of our issue now, getting back to how we started the conversation, Steve, is it is the technology that we have, and it's the way that we have been communicating increasingly over the last decade. Like doing what we're doing, it is not people's number one, and this is a general statement, but it's not people's number one mode or method to communicate anymore. Right. That in and of itself lends to things being inflammatory. Because you think about, Steph Curry and his tweet or whatever, however it was he communicated, it wasn't directly with the president. I mean, then you had LeBron James who responded to his response to Steph Curry. And it's all like virtual.
Yes.
And these are gentlemen that they've got the means to be able to sit down together and have a face-to-face, man-to-man conversation. But they chose to communicate via Twitter, I think.
Yeah.
And I think, so the mode and method of communication is in and of itself part of the issue.
Yeah.
I think.
It's a whole lot easier to hate somebody when you don't know them.
Man.
It's a whole lot easier to misunderstand them when you don't have a conversation.
Yes. When you're sitting down looking at somebody face to face, it becomes a little bit more difficult, at least for me, from my perspective, to just be nasty at someone, because you have a chance to feel their humanness in that moment. Like when you sit down and talk to most people and have a good conversation with them, most people, I believe there are some people that are completely manipulated by the enemy, but most people are not mean people, and they don't want bad for you.
Yeah. I agree. I think most people, if you get in front of them and you have a relationship with them, they begin to scratch their head and go, that's not what I thought. That's not what I've been taught. And they'll open up and begin to understand. Jesus talks a lot about humility. The Proverbs talk a lot about humility.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bible says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up.
He will.
And if we would take that humble approach, that maybe I am wrong. Maybe what's going on out there is the right way to protest. Maybe what's going out there needs to be said. Let me learn, and then let me share with you my perspective, because maybe there's something you could learn.
I mean, where are the Christians? Where's the body of Christ in these conversations that we're seeing on the news and on social media? What's our voice?